There's a very good chance at least one of today's 7 foods is already sitting in your kitchen right now. The problem is, most people are eating it in a way that cancels out almost all of its benefit. 2 tablespoons of one specific oil a day is linked to a 14 to 22% drop in dying from anything at all. And a striking study quietly overturned something researchers had assumed for years about what actually calms inflammation down. So today we're counting down 7 foods with the strongest science behind fighting inflammation, and exactly how to eat each one so you're not leaving the benefit on the table. Hey, I'm Larry, and I'm here to guide you through the science of living longer, feeling better, and aging on your own terms. And today we're talking about foods that fight inflammation. But before we get to the food part, let's actually get clear on what this inflammation even is and why calming it down might do more for how long and how well you live than almost any other health advice you've ever heard. Not the swelling after you twist an ankle. That kind is loud, obvious, and actually useful. It's your body sending repair crews to the scene. We're talking about the other kind. The low-grade, slow-burning kind that researchers call inflammaging, because it seems to show up almost automatically as we get older, quietly running in the background for years or decades without a single symptom you'd notice. Here's the part that should get your attention. Scientists at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging now list chronic inflammation as one of the actual hallmarks of aging itself, right up there with your cells losing the ability to repair their own DNA. It's tangled up with heart disease, cognitive decline, joint pain, even how fast your skin and muscles lose their strength. It's not a side effect of getting older. Increasingly, it looks like one of the engines driving it, which means fighting it isn't some cosmetic upgrade. It's one of the more direct levers we actually have on how long and how well this whole thing lasts. The good news is this isn't a story about supplements or some exotic protocol. It's mostly a story about what's already sitting in grocery stores if you know which 7 things to actually reach for. And in a couple of cases, how you're probably eating them wrong. And this isn't some fringe wellness theory either. It's the same underlying idea researchers keep finding whenever they study the parts of the world where people routinely live past 90 without ever setting foot in a gym or taking a single supplement. The dishes change from island to island, but the pattern underneath, foods that calm this process instead of feeding it, shows up again and again. Let's start with the food that basically built this entire field of research. Salmon, along with sardines and mackerel, is loaded with 2 specific omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, that do something most foods can't. They actually interrupt the chemical signals your body uses to keep inflammation running. Researchers at the University of South Carolina built something called the Dietary Inflammatory Index, essentially a scorecard ranking foods by how they move biomarkers like CRP and IL-6, the same blood markers doctors already use to flag cardiovascular risk. Fatty fish sits right at the top of the anti-inflammatory side of that list. And this isn't just theory. In a randomized controlled trial on people with elevated cardiovascular risk, swapping in a diet built around oily fish measurably lowered their inflammatory markers within just 8 weeks, not months, weeks. Think of chronic inflammation like a fire alarm that's stuck going off quietly in another room of the house. Omega-3s don't just muffle the sound. They're one of the few dietary tools that actually walk over and reset the alarm. 2 servings a week is the number most research keeps landing on. It's worth pointing out that this isn't a new discovery dressed up as one. Coastal communities from Japan to Norway built entire cuisines around fatty fish for centuries, long before anyone had a name for a cytokine. Modern researchers didn't invent this benefit. They just finally caught up with what a few very stubborn fishing villages already knew. Next up is something that looks far too small to be doing much of anything. Blueberries, along with strawberries and other dark berries, are packed with compounds called anthocyanins, the same pigments responsible for that deep purple-blue color. Anthocyanins are essentially cellular cleanup crews. They neutralize the free radicals that pile up from ordinary metabolism, stress, even sunlight, and that pile-up is a huge part of what quietly ages your cells over time and keeps that background inflammation simmering. Here's the part that surprised even researchers studying this. In a clinical trial on adults in their late 40s through 70s with knee osteoarthritis eating about 40 grams of freeze-dried blueberry powder daily, roughly a cup and a half of fresh berries, for 4 months led to significantly less pain and stiffness compared to a placebo group, along with better walking performance. A handful of blueberries won't out-argue a genuinely bad diet. But as a daily habit sitting on top of decent eating, it's one of the cheapest, easiest anti-inflammatory tools that exists, and unlike most of this list, it doubles as dessert. And frozen counts just as much as fresh, by the way, which matters if you're nowhere near Maine during blueberry season. Frozen berries are typically picked at peak ripeness and flash frozen within hours, so the anthocyanin content barely budges. This is one of the rare cases where the cheaper bag in the freezer aisle isn't a downgrade at all. This next one is the food on this list that actually surprised the scientists studying it, and honestly, it surprised me too. Researchers at Stanford ran a 10-week trial comparing 2 groups of healthy adults. One group tripled their fiber intake, eating whole grains, legumes, and vegetables. The textbook definition of a healthy diet upgrade. The other group added fermented foods, things like kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, and yogurt with live cultures. And here's the twist nobody expected. The high-fiber group barely moved the needle on measured inflammation at all. The fermented food group saw 19 separate inflammatory markers in their blood drop, and their gut microbiome diversity climbed right alongside it. Which makes a strange kind of sense once you remember that somewhere between 70 and 80% of your immune cells actually live in your gut. Kimchi and its cousins aren't just food passing through, they're actively restocking the neighborhood your immune system calls home. For what it's worth, humans have been doing this by accident for thousands of years, long before refrigeration existed. Fermentation was originally just how you kept vegetables from rotting over a Korean winter. Nobody was chasing microbiome diversity, they just really didn't want to run out of cabbage by February. And it turned out to be one of the better accidents in the history of food. So here's what I'm actually curious about. Are you already the person with a jar of kimchi or a tub of sauerkraut sitting in the fridge? Or does the smell alone make you want to back out of the kitchen? And if you're already in, what's your go-to? Kimchi, kefir, kombucha, plain yogurt? Drop a comment below. Let's see which camp actually wins. Popeye ate spinach for muscles. Turns out the real superpower is happening somewhere else entirely, in your blood vessels. Spinach is exceptionally rich in dietary nitrate, a compound your body converts into nitric oxide, which relaxes and widens blood vessels. And unlike most nutrition advice that takes months to show anything, this one moves fast. In one clinical trial, people who ate a nitrate-rich spinach soup saw their central blood pressure drop within hours, along with a measurable improvement in arterial stiffness, meaning their blood vessels literally became more flexible. Stiff, inflamed blood vessels are a huge part of what makes chronic inflammation so dangerous. Since they're forcing your heart to work harder against resistance every single beat, year after year. A vessel that's flexible instead of stiff is doing the cardiovascular equivalent of a garden hose that bends easily instead of one that's kinked and cracking. You don't need a mountain of it either. A serving or 2 a day, raw in a salad or wilted into eggs, keeps that nitrate supply steady. And steady is exactly what your blood vessels are asking for. This is actually the exact same mechanism elite endurance athletes chase when they down a shot of beet juice before a race, since beets are loaded with nitrate too. You don't need to train for a marathon to benefit from it. Your blood vessels will happily take the shortcut through a salad instead. Now for the food that's quietly become one of the most studied ingredients in longevity science. Extra virgin olive oil. Across the wider body of research, from the landmark pre-dimed trial in Spain, which followed over 7,000 adults at high cardiovascular risk, to newer cohort studies, consistent extra virgin olive oil intake keeps landing in the same range. Somewhere around a 14 to 22% lower risk of dying from any cause at all, alongside measurable drops in CRP and better blood vessel function. Not all olive oil earns that benefit equally, though. The compounds actually doing the work, oleocanthal and hydroxytyrosol, show up in far higher amounts in genuine extra virgin cold-pressed oil than in the refined stuff sitting next to it on the shelf. The research keeps pointing to the same daily range, roughly 1.5 to 2 tablespoons. The easiest way to actually hit that number isn't drinking it from a spoon. It's replacing. Swap the butter on your toast, the vegetable oil in your pan, the bottled dressing on your salad, and that couple of tablespoons adds up almost without you noticing. It's no coincidence this is the exact fat sitting at the center of the Mediterranean diet, the same eating pattern researchers keep pointing to on the Greek island of Icaria, one of the original blue zones, where a strikingly high share of residents make it well into their 90s. The olive tree in the backyard usually gets more credit there than any doctor ever does. Here's one that turns snacking into an actual longevity intervention, if the intervention part of that sentence doesn't scare you off. Walnuts. Walnuts are the only nut containing a meaningful amount of ALA, a plant-based omega-3, alongside melatonin, and a dense mix of polyphenols. In a 2-year randomized trial out of Barcelona and Loma Linda University, older adults who added walnuts to their daily diet showed protection against telomere attrition, the gradual shortening of the protective caps on your chromosomes that's considered one of the clearest markers of cellular aging. 2 years is a long trial for a food study, which is exactly why this one carries weight. This wasn't a short-term blood test blip. It was a measurable difference at the level of actual chromosomes in people who did nothing more dramatic than eating a handful of walnuts most days. A handful, about an ounce, roughly 7 whole walnuts tossed into oatmeal, yogurt, or just eaten straight from the bag, is the range most of this research is built around. And yes, I'm fully aware a walnut looks suspiciously like a tiny wrinkled brain, and no, that's not actually why it's good for you. That's just a coincidence nature apparently thought was funny. The real reason is far less poetic and far more chemical, but I'll admit the shape does make the whole thing a little easier to remember. Last on the list, and honestly the one most people are already trying and quietly failing at: turmeric. The active compound, curcumin, has genuinely solid evidence behind it. Meta-analyses of clinical trials show meaningful drops in CRP and TNF-alpha, and in people with rheumatoid arthritis specifically, curcumin supplementation has repeatedly outperformed placebo on both inflammation markers and reported joint pain. Here's the catch nobody puts on the spice jar label. Curcumin, on its own, is absorbed by your body astonishingly poorly. Most of what you sprinkle on your rice or stir into a curry passes straight through without ever reaching your bloodstream in a meaningful amount. The fix is almost absurdly simple. One well-known study found that pairing curcumin with black pepper, specifically the compound piperine, or with a source of fat, boosted its absorption by up to 20 times. It's a single striking result rather than a guaranteed multiplier, but the direction is consistent across the research, which means the difference between turmeric doing something and turmeric doing basically nothing might come down to whether there's a single crack of black pepper on top. Which is a little inconvenient for anyone who's paid $8 for a golden milk latte from a coffee shop lately, expecting it to fight inflammation, and gotten mostly turmeric-flavored oat milk in return. The trend had the right idea. It just usually skips the one ingredient that actually makes the whole thing work. So let's actually pull this together. Salmon and walnuts bring the omega-3s. Blueberries and turmeric bring the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds. Kimchi rebuilds the gut microbiome your immune system depends on. Spinach keeps your blood vessels flexible instead of stiff. And olive oil ties nearly all of it together as the fat you're cooking everything else in anyway. None of these 7 foods is a magic bullet on its own, and nobody's asking you to eat all 7 today. The research keeps pointing to the same underlying idea. It's not one miracle ingredient. It's a pattern, repeated often enough that your body stops treating inflammation like an emergency and starts treating it like background noise it can actually manage. Start with 1. A handful of walnuts this week, fish twice instead of 0 times, a jar of kimchi you actually finish. The science says consistency beats perfection every single time. Most health experts land on roughly the same practical target anyway, aiming for whole, nutrient-dense foods to make up about 75% of what you eat, while leaving real room for the other 25, the birthday cake, the fries, the glass of wine on a Friday. Nobody studied 90-year-olds on Icaria eating perfectly. They studied them eating well, most of the time, for most of their lives. If this changed even one thing you're going to reach for next time you're at the grocery store, that's exactly the kind of thing worth a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people trying to figure out this stuff too. And if you don't want to miss what we're digging into next, hit subscribe and turn on that bell because there's a lot more of this rabbit hole left to explore. Stay curious, stay long.